Thank you all for coming. Most of you are actually on time, so that's a good start. Tonight is our first in person this year, I think. This season. We like to do 1, 2 each side of Christmas. Get people together, come to the bar afterwards, have a bit of a few drinks and socialise. It's not just about coming here and listening to what Aidan and Gráinne are going to say, but it's as much about the socialising afterwards. So hang around afterwards if you can and meet your peers. So tonight we're going to talk about BusConnects, primarily Dublin, taking it from planning all the way through to going on site in the next few weeks, hopefully. It's going to be a really interesting project I've been involved in for quite a while, and I presume quite a few people here have been involved in it over the years. Aidan and Gráinne will give their presentation. I'll go through that in a second. But first, just tell you about what's coming up on our side over the next while. The Active Travel and Sustainable Travel CPD seminar, which is a free seminar, which is relevant for a lot of people working on this, will take place on the 6th of November. You can just register online and it's open to anybody who wants to attend. Next one, we'll have a housing lecture, probably from Fingal County Council, on the 20th of November. Details of that will come out in the next couple of days or next week. Following that, we have the road safety strategy from the Department of Transport. It's been updated in earlier on this year. We have a lunchtime presentation on that on the 10th of December. And we will have another one on the Belfast Transportation Hub, co-hosting with ICE Republic of Ireland at some stage over the next 2 months. So lots happening between now and Christmas. We like to get you all at these things. We like nice big numbers on our calls and spread a bit of knowledge around our people. So tonight we have Gráinne Mackin, who's the Director of Communications for BusConnects. She has 25 years experience working on many, many different things. Particularly relevant for this would be Lewis Cross City for a good while, Dublin Bus, and has been involved in BusConnects 2018 for quite a while. So been there, apart from Aidan, the longest nearly on the project to date, is it? Anthony's longer, okay. So out of the many, many people who work on it, these are the 2 people who've been here from more or less the start. Aidan is the head of BusConnects infrastructure in Dublin, and he's been head of the section since 2022. He's a graduate of Trinity College from 1997 and worked with Dublin City Council on many projects. And I know it's not even here, but I'll say my favourite one is O'Connell Street. Going back, which is, I even said to him recently, is still a fabulous looking project nearly 20 years later. So, and it still looks as fresh as anything out there. And that's what good design does. And that's a very important lesson for us all. Get a good designer, get good architects, good engineers involved, and we create beautiful spaces that work. We also create ones that don't work, but we'll focus on the positives tonight. So I'm going to hand you over to Aidan, who will go through... Gráinne's first, is it? No. Aidan's first? Grand. Should have checked that. Hand you over to Aidan, who will give the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks, everybody, for coming. I see good few friendly faces out there, which is good to see. As Joe said, I've been involved since 2018 in this, and... It's nearly 7 years. The 12th of November 2018 I started. I think there's one person who started before I did, which would be Anthony Sheehy, when I started, John Fleming was there. John is usually known to everybody around. Whenever I mention John Fleming's name, people seem to know who he is. He's retired now, and I took over from him then in 2022. It's been an amazing project to work on, I have to say, and I couldn't have wished for a better place to be, I think, in terms of provision of transport infrastructure and the ability to actually deliver something for Dublin. So I'll get into the presentation. That's just what Joe read out, so I'm not going to say that again. And just to go into why we're here. So we're going to start from the start, essentially, and run through to where we are now. In terms of our programme. The scale and ambition is something we also wanted to highlight, just, BusConnects in numbers. With 12 schemes running all at once, it's been a challenge to run them in parallel, and they were all worked on in parallel. And there's some figures we can show you later about the numbers of people and the numbers of, or the sort of the amount of documentation we provided. We'll talk about the government support, how it aligns with the plans, the planning and consultation, scale and complexity of the planning applications, procurement processes, emphasise the importance of public engagement. So, engaging with the public on this scheme, again with 12 schemes underway, and making sure that each of the schemes was properly considered, and public opinion and public view was considered at all stages is something that we've worked very hard on, and Gráinne will talk a bit more about that. And we'll outline how the public will stay informed during construction and what's next. So I suppose, why BusConnects? Well, congestion is one of the things we wanted to look at, but rather than solving congestion, it's more to give people a choice. They don't have to sit in congestion themselves, whilst making sure that the public transport buses are actually out of the congestion and are not being affected by it. It's, as I said, congestion isn't something we're going to solve directly, but indirectly it does allow public transport to become a primary mode as opposed to something that people would think as secondary. We are ranked 8th globally and 3rd in Europe in terms of congestion, and again it's something that does have a huge impact on public transport, but not just public transport, but cycling then as well. So we wanted to, as far as we could, get cyclists out of general traffic. Population growth, Ireland's population is growing, expected to increase. National Development Plan is important from that point of view, and that's really where our sort of VRES comes from. Climate targets is another thing. So BusConnects programme in total is there's a number of aspects to BusConnects. It's not just the infrastructure. So from zero emissions buses to expanding cycling and walking, and encouraging the modal shift to cars. So removing cars from the roads really is what we want to do. The reallocation of road space to public transport, sustainable modes, cycling, walking. And a lot of the infrastructure in terms of buses is somewhat outdated. I was involved in the QBN office, the QBN project office for quite a number of years, and there were a lot of things we wanted to do which we couldn't at the time. We didn't have the authority to do them, or there wasn't the money to do them. So the BusConnects programme is now allowing us to do the things that we really wanted to do some time ago. Some of the QBCs worked very well, and we wanted to bring that more sort of wider to the city, and this is now giving us the opportunity to do that. So in terms of policy documents, we've got the National Development Plan, we've got our own strategy, the NTA Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy, Climate Action Plans, the National Planning Framework, National Sustainable Mobility Policy, and the National Investment Framework for Transport in Ireland. And I suppose we are in all of those, so we are part of what is seen as the solution to the issues that by virtue of the fact that we are included in all these documents, it sort of gives us the impetus, it gives us the sort of authority to do what we want to do. In terms of where we sit then, so I suppose we answer to the Department of Transport, which is obviously a government department. In terms of BusConnects, we are a delivery agency, but we're also a funding agency. So I'll get into the governance a little bit later on, but this is something that the NTA hasn't historically done in terms of major projects. And the core bus corridor schemes that we're putting in they're ambitious, they're large, they're major projects, and as I said, it's something the NTA hasn't really done before but is now doing, and it required essentially setting up processes, procedures, and everything required that some other agencies would be more used to. and it's now starting to bear fruit. So BusConnects itself, there's 8 initiatives, from the network to the core bus corridors, ticketing, the fare structure, the buses, stops and shelters, and then the zero emissions on the fleet itself. So we'll be concentrating, myself and Gráinne, on the top right-hand side there, number 2, which is a network of bus corridors and cycle lanes, known as core bus corridors. I think we'd probably change that name if we were going back 8 years. And you'll probably see the ones in Cork are sustainable transport corridors, and we're starting to refer to them in Dublin. They're still known as CBCs, and I suggest they probably always will, but I think we'd probably look at something slightly different if we could now. In terms of the role of the NTA, so under the Dublin Transport Act, we can essentially take on the role of the road authority. And that is what we have done here. So it just allows us to centralise all the design, centralise all the planning, centralise the management of construction on all the schemes around Dublin and the local authorities that they run through. So we have sought all the consents, and I'll get into a bit more of that in detail. We're procuring construction, and we will directly manage each of the schemes. Now, once they're complete, they will revert to the local authority and be operated and maintained by the local authority and the bus operators. But in terms of the actual development of each schemes and bringing them through the various planning processes, that's an NTA role. Dublin or BusConnects, the infrastructure programme itself is 12 schemes. They're radial at the moment. And in total is 230 kilometres. That's both directions. It's about 115 kilometres in total length of each, the cumulative length of each. And in that, there's 200 kilometres of cycle lanes. The vision then, faster journeys, reduced emissions and safer cycling. I suppose the other thing is reliability, actually. We do mention faster journeys, but the reliability to the buses is to some degree more important than journey times. John Fleming would kill me if I didn't say reliability was more important than journey times. He was constantly on about that, and he's right. People feel more comfortable when they know, what their journey time is going to be, rather than knowing it could be faster one day but not the next. In terms of the aims and objectives of BusConnects, we have 6 objectives. So enhancing capacity of the public transport system, the climate resilience, low carbon, and efficient public transport service, accessibility to jobs and education, enhanced potential for cycling. Again, the cycling element, to some degree, it was more difficult, and it took more effort to actually get cycling in than the bus priority. If we didn't have to think about cycling, things would be a lot easier. There'd be less land take, etc. But it is something that, it's a very, very important part of our scheme, or all the schemes. Enable the compact growth, regeneration opportunities. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, and, allowing areas to develop, allowing the city to achieve its potential through transport is something we're looking at. It's something we were very, very careful to consider. And then the public realm. So there are various pockets of public realm on most of the schemes, on all of the schemes, where there's high quality paving, high quality planting, street furniture, etc. So we did want to sort of leave a legacy and give something back in terms, over and above, let's say, the transport offering. So what's our timeline been so far? Started in June 2018 with the publication of a discussion document, and we moved quickly then towards the end of 2018 into the first round of non-statutory public consultation. That was phased and staggered throughout sort of the end of 2018 and 2019, and in March 2020 COVID hit, just as we were about to launch our second round of non-statutory public consultation, which pushed a lot of what we did for the second round online. We had virtual rooms, we had webinars, and we were all learning how to use technology, but it was reasonably well subscribed. But because of that, or to some degree because of that, we did run a full third round of non-statutory public consultation towards the end of November 2020. And then during 21, preparing for the applications and then making the applications in 2022 and 23. And fortunately, from the end of 23 and into the start of this year, actually receiving the planning decisions. So in 2 years, or slightly under 2 years, we actually made 12 planning applications to An Bord or An Comisiún Pleanála as it is now, which was difficult to say the least. And again, there's some figures around the amount of actual paper we gave into the board later on. And so now we are very fortunate to be in a position where we're actually into the construction phase, which we'll talk about more later. So this just going back to the initial document, this is the discussion document that was released, the Corvus Corridors Project Report in June 2018. And that led on then to the start of public consultation, which Gráinne is going to talk to us about.
Hi guys. I only have 5 slides. So 1, because I'm not an engineer, and 2, because I have a really simple idea and belief around communications and stakeholder engagement. I think the vast majority of projects, schemes, agencies, organisations run a high risk of not being successful in delivering their projects if they do not do good stakeholder engagement, public consultation, and do not plan adequately for these things. And basically, and also learn from experience. I've worked in lots of companies, both private and public sector, and sometimes you see that comms is an afterthought. It's a sidebar. It's something that people only think of at the end when they're at the design stage, or when they want to start talking to people, they only bring the comms people in the room. So we have a totally different approach from that, and it's something myself and our boss Hugh Cregan, we brought from Lewis Cross City, where we adopted a much more communication-centric approach. And in fairness, I think that's why I believe our approach to comms and how we've engaged has played not an insignificant role, I'd hope you'd add, Aidan, to helping Aidan and his team deliver, I think, what is probably unprecedented, 12 planning approvals for this mega project. And to bear in mind, this was against a backdrop of sustained, extensive public concern, a lot of which was very genuine, very worthy, and very, people were genuinely concerned. And a huge amount of political scrutiny, again, warranted, should be interrogated, we should be asked the questions. I think at any one time we have 5 cabinet ministers within the catchment area of the 12 schemes. I'm not sure if we did that on purpose, but that seemed to be the way. We've had misinformation, disinformation, social media campaigns. We've had protests, marches, we've had demonstrations, we've had the guards called, not for me, but and we've also had poor unaffected trees that have had plastic ribbons that will on them for years, that will live long after us and the trees. So I'm just going to talk briefly now about how we approach communications. So as I said, we've had this style within the NTA, and it's been successful. We have a dedicated communication team. We actually work side by side with Aidan and his technical guys. We sit on the same floor in the same office space. All our engagement and communication is absolutely planned and aligned with project design, side by side. We have communications always at the decision table. I firmly believe that it has to be, the comms person has to be at the table from the very start. And we have always adopted a open and engaging communications approach with all stakeholders, bad actors included. We talk, we listen, we evolve, and we try and learn from people. What does that look in practice? I have this saying, you meet people where they're at. And that's not just in terms of geography, where you go out and you meet them in the community. We do that. But also in terms of people's knowledge and understanding of the project. We need to use everyday language. We need to explain the terminology. You know, we use visualizations, animations, you know, use tangible examples. And also, as a third part, you know, when I say meet people where they're at, how do people get information? Like there was a phase there a number of years ago was everything was online, everything was virtual, not even before COVID. People were, you know, you could email in, you could, you know, fill out an online form. Like we now do everything, and I'll just show you an example of that. We do face-to-face leaflets, we do radio, we do onboard bus, we do community, we establish community forums, we meet residence groups, we stand in shopping centres and community centres, you know, which, you know, can be grim. You know, there was some evenings where it was, but we go and we meet people where they're at and we talk to them how they receive their information and how they understand information. So there's some metrics there, guys, like, you know, we've been doing this for a long time, and it'll just show you a scale of what we've had to do to get the 12 applications, but I think it's paid dividends to us. You know, you start with resistance, and that's natural because people, you know, there's this, you know, a bias about keeping the thing, you know, rather than going into the unknown. But we listen to people, and you end up, if you talk to the right people and you are consistent and you learn and grow their trust, they'll, you know, you get into a problem-solving situation, which we have in a lot of places. And also, you know, we understand that local people have much better information than us on the actual local specifics, pinch points, things we had overlooked, people, you know, needs that we weren't aware of. You know, you have to get that context. And then as time went on and as we built the years, and we did 3 rounds of non-statutory public consultation before the statutory statutory consultation, we started to build trust, and people started to understand and appreciate that, yeah, Aidan, when he says he's going to listen, he's going to come back and do another meeting, and he's going to be there, and we're going to give you feedback. I mean, I think we did 11 nights. It sounds like, you know, some sort of tribute band, but we did 11 nights in a row of community forums every evening for 11 nights in a row, bar the weekends, to get out to people and to talk to people. So, you know, that's what it takes. But I think it's testament to what we've managed to deliver. And again, we don't, you know, we do the whole gambit. We don't pick and choose. We don't say we'll just do online, or we'll just do a webinar, or we'll just do this. We do drawings, we do maps, we do bilingual leaflets, we do lots of brochures, we do in-person public information events, we do sign language interpreters at it, we do Irish, we do accessible, we do easy to read documents. Huge amount of work. It's dense, it's labour intensive, but it has to be done. And you know, it has stood to us. Like when we look back, I know, and it's only when you're pulling together presentations like this, you kind of go, geez, like, you know, look at all the work we did. But, you know, we created 12 individual websites for each of the schemes. We now are moving into construction. We've interactive maps, we do advertising, we have all our social media channels running. And we need to do this, and we will continue to do this, because we're now moving into a different phase, and we're pivoting into from public consultation to what we plan to do, to this is actually happening and this is what it's going to look like. And again, having worked in Lewis Cross City, I get that, you know, we might talk about, you know, this is a shaped city, transformation of the city. It's going to change the shape of the city. It's a mega project. It's billions of investment. But when it comes down to it, and when you start doing infrastructure, as I'm sure a lot of you guys will know, it comes down to local influence and what is affecting people and the quality of life. And the things that I know are going to come up again and again, and we need to be ready for them, is what I've listed up there. Poor communications. When we're disrupting people, it's actually more acceptable once people get a heads up, they get a notice. You know, they will complain, they don't want things happening, but if they know it's going to happen, we give them clear, timely updates, then, you know, at least they can plan for it. Okay, they're not happy. Bins, when I worked on Lewis Cross City, bins not being picked up was one of the biggest complaints, that the bin lorry couldn't get down the road because it was a work site, nobody had told people, things like that. Construction vehicles, again, another bugbear of people. Like, we're taking away park, you know, we have a site open, but all of a sudden, like, a load of, you know, construction vehicles are allowed to park free and nobody passes any remarks. Big problem. Noise, dust, site clearance, site cleanliness. Again, another issue we had, like, you know, litter and the site's looking bad. Things like this really bother people. there's no point saying this is going to change the way the city runs if people are looking at it and they're saying this is just a mess. You know, utility disruption, poor traffic management, you know, people concerned about what's it doing to the property values, deliveries, businesses. Like, we're going to be building in a living, thriving 24/7 city. We have to be able to work alongside the city and make sure the city still operates. We have to be all over things like deliveries and making sure people are looked after. Schools and churches, like when, again, another example, we were in Lewis Cross City, I don't know how many times we had to pause works for weddings, funerals, Irish oral exams, like the kind of stuff you mightn't think would happen, and all of a sudden you do. And if we don't react, then, you know, we lose people's trust. So that's where we're going to be at with our construction communication. So we're moving into a different phase, and Aidan, you have a slide later on where you'll kind of show what plans we've put in place. This is just kind of some mind-blowing numbers, like, you know, myself and Aidan kind of were pulling them together going, wow, how is that possible? But this is the metrics we did. So over 600,000 sheets of A4 paper delivered, like on pallets down to Onboard Penola, to the point where I think they were asking us not to, like, you know, please. Met hundreds, if not thousands of people. Massive numbers of submissions, 500,000 website visits, loads of, at any one time, there was over 1,000 people working on BusConnects at one time. So that just gives you a sense of the scale, and we did it, and we delivered, and we weren't deterred by all of the noise around it. We just kept kind of going at it, like, you know. So what did we learn? I suppose, you know, the thing that we learned, and it's actually really hard, you have to actually still remember that you have to keep the principal objectives of the project in mind, even if it's difficult. Like, we made difficult choices, trees, parking, you know, impacts on people's houses, their properties. Like, we had to make those choices because we have to deliver the objectives of the project. Consultation will never be enough. You will be told, you didn't talk to us, we never heard of it. I've also worked down on BusConnects Cork, and you know, we've done 3 rounds of public consultation down in Cork as well, and I had a lady say to me, nobody's heard of BusConnects Cork, and you're the talk of the town. And I was like, okay. So this is, you know, it's never enough. You never do enough. People don't hear. They don't, you know what I mean? So that's just the way it is. And you kind of have to accept that and understand that. Again, I'd advise anybody who's involved in any time of public consultation, stakeholder engagement, never underestimate the amount of time it takes to prepare. So we're in an age now where we have to make sure documents are accessible, that they're bilingual, that they are understandable, that they're consumable, and they make sense to people. Always make sure their integration with the design, the planning guys, and be in the room at the same time. As I said, I've talked about the quality of the information. Know your stakeholders. Like, you really, you know, from every quarter and at every level, and engage early. Just say we're coming out to talk to you more, even if you don't have a lot to say at the time. Just go out and let them know. To-do list, it's never ending. Just, that's an FYI, but you all know that anyway. So you do the next thing that is the most necessary thing to do. Listen. And we've always been willing to listen. And people were very sceptical at the start. They just didn't believe that we were listening. But by purely listening, evolving, changing, they could ended up actually seeing that we were willing. And where it's realistic or there are valid suggestions, take them on. And I'll finish on this one. And not to sound like master in Kung Fu to this grasshopper, you seek to understand before you can be understood. And basically what that means is you listen to people. You know, you let them tell you what they feel, what their concerns are, if they're genuine, if they've been conflated with other issues. After that, then you tell them what you want them to understand. So that's me. Done. Thank you.
Thanks, Gráinne. Fortunately or unfortunately, I have considerably more than 5 slides to get through. No, that's okay. Between now and probably 7:30, so we'll fly through these anyway. So, stakeholders, I suppose Gráinne sort of mentioned the public and how we sort of make sure that we consider all those, but we also have significant, I suppose, technical stakeholders, you might call them. So just to set out our own structure at the moment, as you can see, we're a reasonably small team. I think without really trying to, we've become a thin client, and we've relied heavily on external service providers, which again I'll touch on. So at the moment we're broken into functional areas. Previously we would have been more project manager or scheme based, and the EIAR, the environmental side of things. We're now in functional areas, let's say. So we've got things like a project management office, commercial and cost management. There's the technical side of things, LA liaison, which is a huge role, actually, the liaison with local authorities and ITS, and the land side of things is an enormous challenge, actually, for various reasons. But if you can imagine the amount of letters that we've actually issued, I think Gráinne's slide said something like 24,000 letters, I think, which is more paper to add to the 600,000 pages. And then the scheme delivery and integration, which is the actual delivery of the schemes and construction. And we have the communications section, which is led by Gráinne, for all of BusConnects, not just the infrastructure we're talking about tonight. And then we have a property and claims unit now, which has been a fantastic addition, actually, to our internal structure in terms of bringing knowledge, expertise, and project management. Just to show that in terms of the NTA internal stakeholders, we've interacted with literally everybody in the organisation, from strategic planning, transport modelling, capital programme office, Joe, quite a lot, property and claims unit, but even facilities, things you wouldn't necessarily, the actual building, we had to have everything on public display. And there was, significant logistical requirements for that, in terms of bringing in additional resources and finding seats and onboarding, and in terms of things like procurement, legal, risk, etc. All these things are, they're our own internal departments, but our team isn't the only part of who's interacted within the NTA on BusConnects Dublin infrastructure. So, as I mentioned, local authorities probably are our biggest stakeholders. They essentially we will be handing them all over to the local authorities at a point in time, and they'll be managed and maintained by them. We've had fantastic engagement, I have to say, from each of the local authorities over the last 7 years. There's various resources being put in place by each of the local authorities to engage with us, and they've engaged for every step of the way and still are. And that I'm including the councillors in that. We do have a lot of engagement with the political side of the house. They don't always like what we're doing, but we try and explain to them patiently why we have to do it. And the transport agencies, obviously TII, Waterways Ireland, and Irish Rail, three of our biggest stakeholders. And again, we've had really good engagement with everybody, and right from the start through preliminary design and up toward, into our construction. This just sets out some of the other stakeholders. I'm not going to go through all these, there's quite a lot, but you can see all the utility companies are in there as well. So we've engaged with them over the years, again, from the planning side of things and through to the development of tender documents for construction, etc. It says others at the top, which seems slightly dismissive, but it's more to do with the NEC contract form, which I'll come into later. Is anybody that's not a party to the contract is known as an other. I'm not trying to be rude. They're all very important. Service providers, as I mentioned, we've relied heavily on service providers over the years. A good few of you are in the audience tonight. In terms of right from the start, from the route options, engineering designers, preliminary, or the business case, EIA, legal, insurance, commercial, all the various aspects that are required. And again, one of Gráinne's stats was, at one point there was, we think, over 1,000 people, individuals, working on this project in various areas. And again, it's a function of managing 12 schemes all at once and trying to get everything done together. So in terms of the design, I'll quickly run through some of this. The sort of standard cross-section we're looking at in terms of putting, bus lanes, segregated cycle tracks, pedestrian facilities, and also allowing for cars. We have been criticised to some degree for that, but we do. We're not closing the city necessarily to cars. It's more about, as I said, reallocating the road space so that public transport, cyclists and pedestrians have a greater share of the transport offering. Started off in 2000. These were published in 2018. They actually started a little bit before that in terms of the route selection. Again, very large documents, and starting off with the sifting and then moving into sort of multi-criteria analysis and determining, what appropriate routes are based on various criteria in terms of catchment, in terms of what the best design you can get in a particular route, and that's essentially how we arrived at the routes that we have. We developed a preliminary design guidance booklet. This was really for us, or to guide us, rather than actually setting standards per se. It was more of a sort of a compendium of existing standards, from things like cycle manual, the various TII guidance, SUDS, various things. Even Dutch cycle manual in terms of CRO. We did include some aspects of that in the designs. And as I said, it was a sort of a compendium of various things, like a menu of options that you could choose from, just to try and make sure that people, considered everything they could. And it just acted as a guide in terms of the consistency of the design across. As I said, trying to marshal essentially, 4 engineering designers, 3 schemes each is what they had, and making sure that the designs were consistent across the 12 and didn't sort of differ to the point that people would sort of wonder why things were different, meant that we just wanted to have a singular document that people could pull menu of sort of options from. In terms of what, provision of bus priority, obviously there's bus lanes, signal control priority, whereby a queue is relocated at signals, and the bus can then drive through to on a relatively free-flowing section of road with the cars queuing prior to that. And then bus gates is the other thing. So bus gate, it's essentially a short section of bus lane that only allows buses, cyclists, emergency vehicles, taxis as well, to travel through that. It did enable us to do certain things in terms of reducing the amount of land take and reducing the amount of trees that we were taking, which we'll come to on in a bit. And then the junction arrangements. So we had essentially 4 main types of junctions, all protected for cyclists, and they varied around really what the bus priority is, and what sort of level of protection we could have, whether it was a constrained environment, which a lot of the city is, as we know, or there was more space to do certain things. SUDS is also something that was considered at every stage, and we've significant amount of SUDS, systems on all of the schemes actually. It being an urban environment, the additional sort of impermeable areas is actually relatively constrained because it's already fairly developed, but we are still increasing it to some degree. So just to run quickly through the development at preliminary design, and this is the non-statutory public consultation. So this was the first one, and this is actually Pembroke Road, which is just up the road. And in terms of this is Bagger Street. Well, it's close, but it's this will just show you what kind of things we did or what changes we made. So if you look then at the second round of public consultation, you can see it's quite different. So I'm going to go back to the first one. So if you look, I don't know if there's a pointer. What we did here was actually we introduced a bus gate. So if you look at what Waterloo Road there in the middle of the right-hand slide, you can see that there's been a bus gate introduced. And that was largely because, during public consultation, we had a lot of representations around what we were doing on Pembroke Road. And the introduction of the bus gate meant that we could actually do away with bus lanes altogether on this stretch of Pembroke Road, which meant that almost all, except for a small bit at the top, almost all of the land take was removed from the scheme, and most of the trees were kept. And these are the changes that Gráinne mentioned are sort of necessary as part of public consultation. We all want to do the best, and we all want to get the best scheme we can, but it's not always the right scheme for the local communities that goes out initially. And we do engage, and we do consider what people are saying to us, and we do make changes, and it's very important that we show that we make those changes. And again, so this is the third round of public consultation, and essentially following the feedback from the second round of public consultation, it essentially confirms what we want to do, and we bring it forward then into the future design. So this just shows an area of, where urban realm is considered. The removal of left slips makes a massive difference in terms of the amount of area that you can give over to nice areas, to good quality planting, good quality paving, etc. And this is one of those areas. Again, it's just an example of changes we made. This is the first round of public consultation for the Ringsend scheme, and by the second round we decided to move the Schertzer bridges, thanks to Owen actually, who's here somewhere. We will always, well, I could say blame him for it, depends how well they go and we actually do build it. But this is the kind of innovation that people were bringing to the schemes that we did bring on then in terms of into the further rounds of public consultation, and this was a big bullet to bite essentially, but we did it, and it has now obviously received planning approval, so it's something we are planning to do, and it will make a big difference. And again, this was confirmed then in the third round of public consultation. So the Schertzer bridges on the North Quays, we are planning to move out of the way essentially, and into an area where they'll be used as pedestrian facilities and are likely to last longer if nothing else. This is an area now in Ballyfermot, the famous Ballyfermot roundabout, where we did have an initial design. We got more kickback about what people felt should actually be in that area. And the people of Ballyfermot were extremely attached to their roundabout. And they felt that this was part of their history, part of their culture. It was built actually as Ballyfermot was being built. It's been there since the 50s. And we probably underestimated, how attached people were. So we did make a change here. In terms of the arrangement of the junction. It operates in the same way, but it just looks slightly different, and we've sort of reallocated the road space. So there is still an open area, and it's more accessible. You don't actually have to cross the road to get to the middle, because believe it or not, people do have events in the middle of the roundabout, which we didn't think was necessarily a good idea, but they do like this now, as it happens, and this was done with the local community, and took about almost a year, I think, really to get a final design in this. And that just shows the difference between what we initially had on the left and what we are now planning to do. And this is one of the first schemes that's on site. In terms of the EIA legislation and guidance, I'm not going to go through all that, but it does, there's a lot of documentation that has to be considered, as people are probably aware. And then our key policy documents. So each of the EIAs has to consider each one of these, which includes things like development plans, transport strategies, and local area plans, etc. And they were considered fully. So Just in terms of the EI itself, they were all screened in, so we did have to screen them in. The construction of a new road of 4 more lanes, or the realignment or widening of an existing road so as to provide 4 more lanes, generally we would come under that. But there's also the element of cumulative impact, and that's where the consistency point comes in. So we'd had a service provider in Jacobs Arab Sistra who essentially put together the EIAs for each of the 12 schemes, along with the EDs, our engineering designers. And consistency was the main reason we wanted one entity doing them. If you're going to, attempt to apply for 12 planning applications all at the same time, essentially, they have to be fully consistent with each other. And that was something that was really important for us, that what we were saying in one EIA was exactly the same as we had said in another one. And this was the structure of the EIA, again, which is brought forward to all of our schemes, just to maintain that consistency. In terms of surveys, then again, just the scale, we had to multiply this by 12 and do them across the city. So, we had a lot of people wandering the streets of Dublin doing surveys. We had to engage with the public. We had to engage with private entities to allow us, for air quality sampling and for noise and vibration surveys, etc. And again, a massive amount of work. In terms of transport modelling, we start off with the ERM, the Eastern Regional Model, developed local area models, corridor microsimulations, and then moving on to the junction design. And it was an iterative process, so each one of these elements was fed back in, and reiterated to optimize the schemes. So, in terms of the benefits that we have, our goal really was 100% priority on all the schemes, and we didn't necessarily achieve it everywhere, but as you can see, there's significant increases in the amount of priority that we are now bringing, right up to 100% for the majority of the schemes, and the ones that don't tend to, it would be in areas that would be less required. But I think we've been reasonably successful in what we've been trying to do. And again, segregated cycling facilities, we want to bring it up to as much as we possibly can on each of the routes. And some of the routes were very, very underserved in terms of cycling, and we were able to increase it quite considerably. In terms of reduction in car journeys, so this is really what we wanted to try and achieve on each of the schemes. Refocus people onto public transport, give people more of a choice. You can see that there are significant reductions in car journeys. So what we did was we carried out a sensitivity analysis to sort of maximize the capacity and sort of sweat the asset. It showed that overall there's something like 200,000 car journeys a day in the opening year. Once all schemes are in place, which is a significant contributor to sort of the climate action plan for Ireland. And then in terms of what we're actually, increasing in bus passengers, increasing in cycling and walking, we're up at around 50% for some in terms of bus passengers. And similar figures then for cycling and walking. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but we will send this around afterwards and people can see it at their leisure. But the impacts that we will be bringing to the city are fairly significant. So all of this then is sort of collated then into a set of documents. So we have, again, 12 sets of these. And that's just a picture showing the sort of groaning shelves we have in our office. We actually have a room in the NTA that's solely for BusConnects Dublin infrastructure documentation and EIAs. And I think unfortunately it did run out of space at some point, and it did cause a bit of a problem, but we have to hold on to these, unfortunately, so they'll be there for quite a while yet. In terms of the land compulsory purchase, so the NTA does have the authority to carry out land acquisition, and both under the Dublin Transport Authority Act, and then we come under the Housing Act 1966, which is the piece of legislation that all compulsory purchase orders are carried out under in the state. This just shows you an example of where we have land take. You can see then on the left hand side is the general arrangement drawings. We show the permanent and temporary land take, and on the right hand side the equivalent deposit maps. So for each of the schemes, as you can see in an area like this, is quite considerable land take, and this just shows you then, so there's about 1162 plots amongst the schemes. Now that doesn't necessarily tell the full story, because a lot of those plots could have multiple interests. So there's multiples of the total plots of interests that we have to interact with. The letters would have gone out to, notices would have been served on. So in terms of the approval process itself, it was carried out under Section 51 of the Roads Act 1993, and again Section 76 of the Housing Act for the CPO. We did consider whether we make all of the applications all at the same time, all of the one day. I don't know what An Bord Pleanála would have done to us if we'd done that, but it was pretty bad as it was. So that was administratively really not possible. We talked about staggering the applications and then making multiple applications. So it's a bit of a hybrid of each of the last two. I think, in terms of what we wanted to make sure that the board could consider them all together in terms of the cumulative impacts of each of the schemes. There's a cumulative impacts chapter in each of the EIAs, and each one is consistent with each other, and we wanted An Bord Pleanála to know that and consider them in that way. Each of our applications required newspaper ads. I think this is the Bray one. So this was a 31-page ad, because it included all the schedules for the CPO. Considerable amount of money, actually, that we spent on advertising. And we had to do further ads then once the CPO was confirmed, and once CPO was confirmed. So our applications then, over the course of about a year and a half, right up to August 2023. And there was a statutory public consultation process, which we were given an opportunity to respond to the submissions that were received. Now again, some of these documents, the Bray one on the right hand side actually was over 900 pages, and we were given 4 weeks to put it together. We did look for an extension, and we were granted extensions on that one, but again, significant amount of documentation required. In terms of oral hearings, we had none, so I can't really talk to you about them. We were as surprised as probably some of you here might be to have no oral hearings whatsoever. We were fully expecting that there would be a number of them, if not an oral hearing on all the schemes, but no, it turned out largely to do with actually these response documents and the quality of the work that went into them, and how we engaged with all the submissions and answered essentially all the issues that were raised. So where are we now in terms of the schemes? Contract has been awarded for Liffey Valley. It's the first scheme, and we'll be looking to award Ballymont Finglas hopefully this year. We do have a lot of JRs. We have 15 JRs, one of which we do have a judgment on now, but we are lucky in that 5 of the schemes essentially have no JRs, and we can actually proceed to construction with those. And a number of the JRs we will be looking to settle as well, and we do think are settleable. In terms of governance then, so we are, I suppose the NTA is both the approving authority and the sponsoring agency for the schemes. And we do have sort of separate entities who take on the role of the sponsoring agency and the approving authority. We have a programme board set up for the approving authority. And then from a governance point of view, it then goes up to the NTA board before going to department in terms of approvals for various stages of the programme. And we do come under the infrastructure guidelines under the public spending code. So approval gate 1 is preliminary business case, approval gate 2 is the tender, and then approval gate 3 is the award. So we have if the scheme is under €200 million, it can be done internally for approval gate 2 and 3. If it's over €200 million, you need a ministerial decision, approval gate 2, and a government decision, approval gate 3. We now have a client partner in place since November 2024, and it is under an NEC4 professional services contract. It's Jacobs, Arab Sister, and Chandler KBS in partnership. And this is the structure then. So it actually mirrors the structure that I mentioned to you earlier with the functional areas. So there's project management, commercial, etc., right up to a communications section, which Gráinne would interact with. And then there's a separate team then for on site for each of the schemes. So we have one team on site and another one being stood up then for the second scheme. And further teams will be stood up then as we go on. In terms of the construction procurement, we started with market engagement in 2023. We considered multiple options in terms of what we would, how we would procure the schemes, whether we would establish a framework, whether we would have consecutive concurrent tendering, and what the contract type would be. And, we had a lot of decisions to try and make in terms of whether it was D&B, whether it was, design build, whether employer designed, and what, as I said, what type of contract we'd be using, whether it's PwC, FIDIC or NEC. And ultimately we arrived at a framework agreement which allowed us to bring consistency to the schemes. Again, that consistency thing, a bit like the EIA, we wanted the schemes to look and feel the same, and we wanted all our contractors to engage in that. We went with design and build, just from, I suppose, from a efficiency point of view, and again a consistency point of view. So each of the contractors can learn from the initial contract, let's say, and bring that to their particular scheme. And NEC4 option C, and which is a target cost contract, that did require a derogation from the Office of Government Procurement, which we did receive again in 2023. So we shortlisted 8 contractors as part of a suitability assessment, and we issued our invitation to negotiate on 16th of August last year. And that ITN included for the framework agreement and the first 2 schemes. And we now have a framework agreement established with 6 contractors, and GMC is the first contractor then to be awarded one of the contracts. It's an NEC4 contract, again underpinned by mutual trust and cooperation, same as the client partner, and it allows us to allocate risk essentially back to us to some degree, to give contractors more confidence that it is a sort of a collaborative approach. It's actual cost plus free, and it does include KPIs. So the first contract was signed on the 1st of July, and that's the Liffey Valley scheme. This is just another nicer shot possibly of the Ballyfermot roundabout, and Ballymun Finglas, which was the subject to a best and final offer, and we're currently awaiting a final approval from government. And again, that's just a shot of Blackwire Bridge, which is the North Circular Road actually, which we're actually going underneath with a cycling and walk-up facility. So just to quickly go through some of the figures, we've 140 kilometres of utilities relocation, just, again shows you the scale, 340 junction upgrades, significant utilities work in terms of ESB, gas, water, telecoms, and we're planting 5,700 trees, which is, it's a significant addition to the city. In terms of our private gardens, we're 410, and business frontages is 290. One of the stats that is interesting there is 8,500 driveways that we have to negotiate. We haven't acquired all them. It's not all part of our CPO, but we do have to We do have to consider, as I said, 8,500 separate driveways across the schemes. And obviously there's a large coordination effort between some of the other major projects that are ongoing at the moment in terms of Metrolink, DART Plus and the active travel schemes. Sustainability, I'm not going to go through all that, but there is a significant sustainability piece in each of our contracts in terms of what the contractors have to do, what they have to consider. And, you know, they're bound to do this. It's stitched into the contract, and things like social value are actually there's a KPI for social value. So we are holding contractors to account for those kind of things. So the construction itself, Liffey Valley, again, 13.5 kilometres of underground utilities, 27 signalised junction upgrades. These are major schemes, major work carried out in an urban environment. 52 new bus stop facilities and 75,000 square metres of footpath. Again, significant scheme. I suppose we have split it into sections, and the contractor is bound to carry out the schemes in small sections. They're not allowed to open the scheme all at once, just to reduce the amount of disruption, I suppose, in terms, just to manage it in manageable chunks. And we have two types of traffic management from that point of view. Static type A, which would be 24 hours, it's there all the time. And then static type B, which would be the more temporary traffic management. It would be for short-term works that would be potentially more disruptive. So Liffey Valley itself, as I said, is broken into 21 sections, 3 main sections, and we're starting in December. Now they are on site at the moment. They're doing some site investigation works, and we are again the substantive work will start in December. So it'll start out in Liffey Valley first. There's a section in Ballyfermot, and then there's a section closer in towards the city. And that'll be the first places you'll see the works. Ballymun Finglas then will be the second one. Again, a significant scheme. 41 signalised junctions being upgraded, and this one has it's a bigger scheme, and I showed you this earlier. It was Blackfriar Bridge. There are significant structures on this scheme, and there's significant heavy engineering that probably doesn't exist on the Liffey Valley scheme. Ballymun Finglas, it does have significant integration then with the Metrolink. And we are coordinating the Metrolink works with our works. So there will be situations where they will do some and we will do some others, or we might stop each side, and Metrolink will probably end up finishing part of our works. Just briefly then, in terms of coordination, as I mentioned, we have to coordinate with the major transport schemes, and we do have our own traffic forums, which we run every month, and we bring in a lot of our stakeholders, including the guards, transport operators, local authorities, etc., and make sure that everybody knows what's going on and is comfortable with it. It includes things like emergency services as well, so they know what's going on. This is just to show you the overlap with the major projects, and this is what we are dealing with in the city at the moment. It's not easy to manage all this. This is really where the NTA comes into its own, because we do have a coordination piece within the NTA to actually manage all these. We are sort of managing it from our point of view and talking to people, but there is an overview of what's happening in the city. And you'll be glad to know, it's the last slide, just to say how we'll keep people engaged. So we do have a dedicated phone number. We do have local liaison officers on site, both from the contractor and internally. And we are, there will be community forums, there'll be leaflet drops, there'll be, information sessions. We've already had some on Liffey Valley, and they've been very successful.